Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, March 25th, 2026. We are in the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 35. Let's start in verse 1. Josiah celebrated the Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and the Passover lamb was slaughtered on the 14th day of the first month. He appointed the priests to their duties and encouraged them in the service of the Lord's temple. He said to the Levites who instructed all Israel and who had been consecrated to the Lord, "Put the sacred ark in the temple that Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, built. It is not to be carried about on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourselves by families in your divisions according to the directions written by David, king of Israel, and by his son Solomon. Stand in the holy place with a group of Levites for each subdivision of the families of your fellow countrymen, the lay people. Slaughter the Passover lambs, consecrate yourselves, and prepare the lambs for your fellow countrymen, doing what the Lord commanded through Moses." So Josiah commands, and we're going to find out in a few verses later that it's his 18th year. This is the year he starts to rebuild the temple, consecrate it, and so he celebrates Passover at the correct day, and he is wanting the priests to do their function, the Levites to do their functions, and to serve the Passover meal. And he's ordering them to do it. We're going to get into the details of that here in a minute because it does give details here in 2 Chronicles. 2 Kings chapter 23 gives like 3 verses that summarize that he ordered the Passover to be celebrated, and it was, and that's all. Basically, it says. Here it goes into more detail. The chroniclers are trying to point out when people worshiped God and worshiped him correctly. The thing is, we're going to learn Josiah was having the priests dedicate themselves, dedicate the Levites, dedicate the laymen, dedicate the people, dedicate the temple, all on the same day that they sacrificed the lambs. And so it was a bit hectic that day. There was too much to do. He probably did not understand all that would be involved. And the Levites actually saved the day for everybody. But partly it's because they celebrated the Passover by the king's command, but they didn't celebrate it the way Moses told them to. The chroniclers say they did, but then they describe something different than what Moses said. Verse 7, Josiah provided for all the lay people who were there a total of 30,000 sheep and goats for the Passover offerings, and also 3,000 cattle, all from the king's own possessions. His officials also contributed voluntarily to the people, and the priests and Levites, Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Jehiel, the administrators of God's temple, gave the priests 3,600 Passover offerings and 300 cattle. Also, Conaniah, along with Shemaiah and Nathaniel, his brothers, and Hashabiah, Jael, and Jozabad, the leaders of the Levites, provided 5,000 Passover offerings and 500 head of cattle for the Levites. The service was arranged, and the priests stood in their places with the Levites in their divisions as the king had ordered. So the first thing that was different than what Moses had said, Moses said everybody is to select one lamb or a goat from your flocks, or buy one and keep it with you for a period of time, and then you were to slaughter your own. Here, Josiah provides everybody's sacrifice. For one thing, this probably is indicating there's such a great wealth inequality that he and his administration are essentially the only people that can afford lambs for their family. And so he has to provide it for everybody for it to be celebrated. That says something about the country, that the people cannot afford a lamb for themselves to offer and they did not know how to sacrifice a lamb, how to butcher it, how to prepare it. So the Levites the priests have to slaughter it, and the Levites have to prepare it, and we'll get to that in just a minute. The people themselves cannot offer the sacrifice like Moses said. Also, you notice in that offering, everybody who offered sheep and goats, but they also offered cattle. Cattle were not part of the Passover celebration. The only reason you would be offering cattle at the Passover celebration is if you were having to consecrate yourself because you were impure and you needed to be pure before you could eat the Passover. And apparently the priests and the Levites and the officials were not pure, so they had to purify themselves. And the offering of purification like that, yes, it's supposed to, part of it goes to the priest, part of it is burned on the altar, and the rest of it is cooked and served, is boiled and served to the family that's being purified, consecrated. But that was not part of Passover, and you weren't supposed to be doing them at the same time. You were supposed to be consecrated before and come in already consecrated. So the people are doing it at the same time, is the implication. Because they weren't ready, they weren't consecrated. Josiah was, in one sense, rushing the process. He should have planned ahead a year and said, next year we're going to celebrate the Passover, consecrate yourselves, be ready on this date, and we'll come celebrate. But he was pushing it hard. He was wanting the temple consecrated. He was wanting the people consecrated. And so they did it all at one time. And the priests stood in their places with the Levites in their divisions. So they understood what David and Solomon had said to do. They knew who they were. They were in their proper places. They did their jobs. Verse 11, the Passover lambs were slaughtered, and the priests sprinkled the blood handed to them, while the Levites skinned the animals. They set aside the burnt offerings to give them to the subdivisions of the families of the people to offer to the Lord, as was written in the book of Moses. They did the same with the cattle. So they're doing the cattle at the same time, and they're consecrating themselves and each other and the people all at once. And it also indicates that the priests were sprinkling the blood of the Passover animals on the altar, not on the doorpost and lintel above the door. People weren't doing it at their house. They weren't putting the blood where they were supposed to. They were letting the priest put the blood on the altar. They had not studied how to do the Passover, and they therefore were doing it wrong. God understood their heart. God understood their ignorance. God forgave them. That's very evident. But they did it wrong. Probably out of ignorance, probably out of a lack of knowledge. God accepted their consecration. God accepted them, forgave them, because they had not done it in the ensuing generations. Probably Hezekiah was the last king where it had been done. And Josiah has just made a covenant with the people that they will worship Yahweh and Yahweh only. And so he's trying to reinstitute Yahweh worship. And God understands that. But they didn't take the time to study God's word and do it right. Verse 13, they roasted the Passover animals over the fire as prescribed, and boiled the holy offerings in pots, cauldrons, and pans, and served them quickly to all the people. After this, they made preparations for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the descendants of Aaron, were sacrificing the burnt offerings and the fat portions until nightfall. So the Levites made preparations for themselves and for the Aaronic priest. The priests were consecrating so many people that it took them all day to consecrate everybody, to burn everything. They were busy doing priestly duties, and the Levites had to help them by preparing their meal for them. And the Levites did all the cooking, all the roasting of the lambs and the goats, the boiling of the consecrated beef, the cattle, and served everybody. And they had to serve everybody quickly. And the picture that's here is they were frantic to get it out and serve to everybody and back and clean the pot and start the next consecration. They were busy all day cooking so that people could celebrate the Passover and be consecrated. And this is all well and fine if the next year they sacrificed the Passover lamb in their house the way they were supposed to, and, roasted it themselves and ate it with bitter herbs and unleavened bread, and etc. There's no mention here of unleavened bread. So there was a lot they missed. They roasted it like Moses said. That's about the only thing they did right. But the Levites saved the day. They were the people who sat there and made sure everything ran correctly. They cooked and served and cleaned and came back and did it all over again and again and again, all day long. And all the consecrated meals were served. All the Passover meals were served. Everybody got to celebrate. And everybody got to worship Yahweh because the Levites did their job. And the priest sacrificed and sacrificed and sacrificed. And if you look at how many cattle were given, 3,000 cattle from the king, 500 cattle from the Levites, 300 cattle, so that's 3,800 cattle that they sacrificed that day. That's a lot of blood running down through the temple. That's a lot of fat burning on the altar. That's a lot of skinned animals and internal organs being taken out of the temple and burned outside the temple, etc., etc., etc. So the priests were busy that day with nearly 4,000 animals sacrificed and burned. And, a whole bunch of sheep and goats and sprinkling the blood and all that. They were probably exhausted at the end of the day from having slit an animal's throat, blooded out, splashed blood, handed off to the Levites, taken the portions they were supposed to take, put it on the altar. Somebody was tending fire constantly to burn nearly 4,000 animals. And so the Levites were also very busy taking the consecrated meat that was the priest and giving it to the priest. And the priests were too busy doing their job to actually take the meat. They were basically handing it off to relatives. And the relatives were taking it home and preparing it. And then the Levites were taking the rest of it and boiling it. And, everybody was really, really frantically busy all day long with tens of thousands of animals. Verse 15. The musicians, the descendants of Asaph, were in the places prescribed by David, Asaph, Herman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer. The gatekeepers at each gate did not need to leave their posts because their fellow Levites made the preparations for them. So the Levites prepared the singers, the musicians, and the gatekeepers meals and fed them also. Nobody had to leave their assigned place. Verse 16. So at that time, the entire service of the Lord was carried out for the celebration of the Passover and the offering of burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord, as King Josiah had ordered. The Israelites who were present celebrated the Passover at that time and observed the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. The Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel, and none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah, with the priests, the Levites, and all Judah and Israel who were there with the people of Jerusalem. This Passover was celebrated in the 18th year of Josiah's reign. That's where we get that it was done in Josiah's 18th year. He was 26. The phrase there, the Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel, and none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah. That sounds like, oh, he's doing a great job. That's what they're trying to imply. But let's face it, Josiah's grandfather, Hezekiah, had celebrated the Passover. And they had dedicated the temple, and it wasn't yet clean and dedicated. So Hezekiah had consulted, and they decided to do it a month later since they weren't clean yet. And they did it on the second month, like they were unclean or traveling or whatever. And the priest had to consecrate some people that day. But most of the priests, most of the Levites had been consecrated, so there wasn't this huge flood of consecration. The people came and celebrated for 7 days, and then they decided to celebrate it for 7 more days, and they made a covenant with the Lord to worship him, and they left after that spiritual revival, and they went down and tore down all the pagan idols and pagan altars and all that, and cleansed the land as they left. And it made a spiritual difference. Here they celebrated for 7 days, and they're done. It made no difference in their lives. They had celebrated, they had eaten the king's food, but they themselves did not change. Yes, 4 years before, he had made a covenant with all the people that they would worship Yahweh and Yahweh only. But it took them 4 years to get around to consecrating the temple. And when they did, they rushed everything and didn't observe it the way Moses had said. They partially celebrated the way Moses said. And it was a big, hectic affair. Nobody had celebrated that way, ever. That's because nobody celebrated it that incorrectly, that celebrated. God did not hold it against Josiah because his heart was right. He was seeking God. Like David, his heart was after Yahweh. But like David, he didn't know and didn't understand and did things wrong. And God did not confront him. Let him go with it. The implication is this is also the only time Josiah had all of Israel celebrate the Passover. That he saw the spiritual condition of the people and knew they weren't wholeheartedly following God. Or that some of the people celebrated at home next year and the year after and etc. But there was lots of people that just kept on living, didn't change them, that eaten a meal with the king at the big fancy building next door to the palace, and that's all it was. They didn't go out after this and go, we're worshiping Yahweh and Yahweh only, and we're going to tear down all the altars and destroy all the idols. And they left and went back to their everyday lives. And next new moon, if they had been sacrificing to Baal every new moon, they went back to their altar and sacrificed to Baal. If they were going to celebrate Passover next year at Passover, they might celebrate Passover at home. But the people were polluted. And when you get to Josiah's sons, you see that they were polluted. The people did not make the change of heart that Josiah wanted them to make. And God did not rebuke Josiah because he knew Josiah was trying. But this was apparently the only time Passover was celebrated. A sad statement, and they did it wrong. Holy Father, have us to worship you in spirit and in truth, that we would not do things our own way, by our own thoughts, but we would diligently seek what you want us to do and do it that way, that we would be faithful people to you, attempting to do it right. And then if we discover we did it wrong, repenting and turning and doing it right, and then continuing to live it out. That we would genuinely repent of what's wrong in our lives and do things right and worship you and you alone. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, and this has been the Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, March 25th, 2026. This was recorded on Saturday, March 21st, 2026. I had a nice long walk today. I got out early before it got warm. Did some yard work this afternoon, and the good news is the courtesy ticket that we got 2 weeks ago to have our place up to the new city ordinances. We managed to achieve that. Still haven't got everything properly organized to be able to use it efficiently. Spent a lot of the afternoon doing that. Did get a lot of things better organized. I think we're close to having it so we can use it easily and efficiently. It's been a tough 2 weeks. The good news is Bill got home yesterday. Long story, and y'all can ask him about it tomorrow. I hope to see you tomorrow at church. I hope to see you Wednesday. If not, we'll see you here on YouTube. Y'all have a blessed week.